short little introduction, but I gotta read it because I didn't memorize it. As I said, I'm so honored to be here today at my beloved local library, a place that means so much to me and my family, and to introduce someone who needs no introduction, the great Richard Russo. As you probably know, Rick is the author of more than a dozen books, including Empire Falls, which won the Pulitzer Prize, not too shabby, and other brilliant novels such as Somebody's Fool and Nobody's Fool, Straight Man, Bridge of Sighs, and That Old Cape Magic. And he has a new book, which he'll be talking about in a minute, a book of essays. His work has been translated into many languages. Oh, by the way, I'm Christina Baker Klein. I didn't introduce myself. I was too excited.
I was going to say something.
I know. I'm a little rusty. So Rick's work has been translated into many languages, adapted for the screen, and is read by millions. But here in Maine, we claim him as our own, and rightly so. I've had the pleasure of knowing Rick and his wonderful wife, Barbara, for a long time. And like many others, I've been the grateful recipient of their warmth and generosity. Rick has mentored countless writers, championed emerging voices, and given his time and energy to libraries, schools, bookstores, and festivals across the country and beyond. He wears his fame lightly, with humility and grace. In a world that too often rewards noise and self-interest, Rick is the real deal. He became a household name, writing about ordinary people with compassion, humor, and an unsentimental eye. His characters are messy and flawed and deeply human. He gives dignity to small towns, struggling families, and the quiet heroism of everyday life. His books remind us what matters: community, decency, integrity. What could be more fitting than to celebrate the 130th birthday of this library, a sanctuary of books and ideas and human connection, with a writer who so fully embodies those values. Please join me in welcoming Richard Russo.
How do you live up to that introduction? It's wonderful to be here. It took us a little while longer than we thought today, but here we are, and it's wonderful to see all of you. Boy, what a crowd! It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Christina, for that glowing introduction. I'm going to this little book of essays here. If any of you've had a chance to dip into it, you probably one of the first things you notice is that it's every inch a pandemic document. Not everything that's included in this book was written during the pandemic, but a lot was. And I think you're going to be grateful to know that dark as some of the stuff is because of where we were at that time, I'm not going to read one of those from it. I think, aren't we all kind of in a dark enough place right now without encouraging any more of that stuff? So, the piece that I'm going to read tonight is called Meaning. And I'm going to begin by giving you a little visual aid. Right? Some of you in the back probably can't see, but it is a wedding ring. That's all I'll say for now. Meaning. I'm walking first of all, can everybody hear? Okay. I'm walking as I do pretty much every day along the Eastern Promenade near my home in Portland, Maine, when I feel my wedding ring slip off. Luckily, my hands are in my jeans, so no harm done. I slip the ring back on without breaking stride and return to contemplating Casco Bay. I make it another 10 yards before it happens again. When the ring slips off my finger a third time, I give up and leave it there in the bottom of my pocket. Though the jeans that I'm wearing are relatively new, I double check anyway to make sure that there's no hole in the pocket. Having read Tolkien, I know that some rings want to be lost, and others to be found. And I've already lost one wedding ring, though that was decades ago. The ring in my pocket doesn't want anything, of course. It's just a piece of metal and has no meaning other than what I attach to it. It's sliding off my finger because it's January and bitter cold, and my skin is dry, and who knows, maybe I've lost a couple of pounds. As I said, it's perfectly secure right where it is, and yet here I am fretting about its safety and unable to reconcile its being in my pocket when it belongs on my finger. My parka has a tiny pocket with a zipper, and I consider putting the ring there. But that would further distance it from the finger that it's supposed to be on. Also, the zipped pocket of my parka carries its own risks. I'm 73, 76 now actually, but when I wrote this. I'm 73, and my memory is becoming porous. Sometimes I have to page back through whatever novel I'm working on because I can't remember the name of a character who has been absent for the last couple of chapters. And, like many men my age, I too often find myself in front of the open refrigerator, peering at its contents in the hopes of spotting the reason I'm standing there. Am I even in the right place? Is what I'm looking for in the dishwasher, the silverware drawer, the pantry? If I put the ring in the pocket of my parka where it cannot possibly fall out, will I forget doing so? If so, then, 2 or 3 years down the road, the ring will end up with the parka at Goodwill. And in the meantime, I will be left to contemplate what it means that I have managed to lose not 1, but 2 wedding rings. To some people, maybe even to me, that might appear subconsciously intentional. My therapist, if I had one, would surely agree, which is why I don't have one. Part of the reason that I am fretting is that this would be a terrible time to lose the ring. For the last several months, my wife has been suffering from headaches that we have been unable to diagnose. MRIs and biopsies have ruled out the most terrifying scenarios, but there's something scary about not knowing, especially in the wake of the pandemic, which reacquainted all of us with mortality and the uncertainty of the future, realities that in the before times we managed to sequester in the back of our brains. To lose my wedding ring at a time when my wife's health is in question, that would mean something, wouldn't it? Yes? No? Okay, so now I'm going to tell you another story about this same ring. A story that you may find difficult, maybe even impossible to believe. As I said, my wife and I reside in Portland, but for many years we lived up the coast in Camden, where we bought a large, rambling house. It had been on the market for a long time because it was old and it needed a lot of work, and was located on busy Route 1. The first couple of years we were in it, we spent a small fortune replacing windows, shoring up the back deck, updating some old knob and tube wiring so that the place wouldn't burn down. renovating the impossibly dated kitchen, and purchasing some new stainless steel appliances. Money well spent, because our Camden years were wonderful. Our daughters came of age in that house, and when they went off to college and later moved away to begin their own adult lives, Barbara and I threw raucous, wine-soaked dinner parties for our friends, many of whom were also empty nesters. For the first time in my life, I was able to write full-time, an unbelievable luxury. Barbara, an office administrator, had gotten into the spirit of things by shifting gears and becoming a realtor. Summers, we had loads of visitors. Okay, life wasn't perfect. Did I mention the summer visitors? I was traveling a lot, and Camden was 2 hours from the airport in Portland. But all in all, it was a magical decade, and a magical decade and a half of good health, freedom from financial anxiety, and general well-being. And it is in this happy context that I offer the story that many will disbelieve, in whole or in part. But here goes. I'm in our renovated kitchen. I have just returned something to the fridge. I am hurrying because, well, I'm always hurrying, even when there's no reason to. When I close the refrigerator door and head to the sink, I am simultaneously aware of two things: that my wedding ring is not on my finger, and that just a split second before, it was. Time stops. Time stops while I wait for the inevitable plink of the ring landing on the floor or on a countertop. But no plink. I examine my ring finger, half expecting to find it there, because though I sensed its absence, I didn't actually feel the ring slip over my knuckle and off my finger, like I would a decade later walking along the Eastern Promenade. But no, the ring is not on my finger. It seems impossible that it could be somewhere inside the refrigerator, but I check anyway. Maybe when it slipped off my finger, it landed on something soft. A bag of spinach, maybe? A wedge of brie? But no, it's not in the fridge. I know this for a fact, because I take every single thing out of the fridge and examine the empty shelves. When my wife returns, she finds me shining a flashlight into the garbage disposal. The ring, I'm theorizing, flew through the air, landed noiselessly on the rubber seal put there by the manufacturers to keep dimwits from sticking their fingers into the disposal when it's running. After which, the ring slipped sans plink into this mechanism. Wildly improbable, you say? Maybe. But if you've read Sherlock Holmes, then you know that once all the plausible explanations have been ruled out, the only remaining explanation, no matter how far-fetched, must be true. My wife has not read Sherlock Holmes and does not share his logic. As she demonstrates, and she demonstrates this by turning on the garbage disposal, I wince, fully expecting to hear the sound of my wedding ring being chewed to bits. But again, no. I should be grateful to have been proven not just wrong, but borderline lunatic, but I'm not. My wife's explanation for the missing ring makes elegant use of Occam's razor. The ring slipped off my finger earlier in the day, or the day before, or last week, and I've only now noticed its absence. I am, like my father before me, a careless man. Hadn't I admitted as much years before when my first wedding ring went missing? Barbara had wanted to replace it with another gold-plated one, but I talked her out of it. The battleship gray titanium ring we settled on instead was attractive but not terribly expensive, so that when I lost it, I would not feel so bad. A failure of imagination, as it turns out. Because here I am, staring at the stainless steel sink of our remodeled kitchen in Camden, Maine, feeling really, really bad. So, now, fast forward a couple of years. During this period, my wife and I have discussed replacing the second ring. The second ring, but somehow haven't gotten around to it. Because really, what would be the point? I just lose this one too, and since there's no remedy for my carelessness, Barbara has little choice but to send me out on book tours, to writers' conferences, to the West Coast to work on film projects as an apparent bachelor. During this same period of time, our daughters have married and moved away. One is living in Brooklyn, the other in London. It seems unlikely that they will ever live in Maine again, and with them permanently gone, Camden has begun to feel remote. Our large house too full of empty rooms. We think about selling the place and setting up shop in Boston or maybe the Cape. We have had a great run in Camden, but all good things come to an end. What I will miss most is the kitchen. And this is where I am when the thing that you're not going to believe happens. Once again, I'm in a hurry, and I go to the refrigerator, where I find what I'm looking for. Back then, I could open the refrigerator door, and I knew what I was after. I grab it. I grab what I was looking for with my right hand and close the door with my left. And just like that, in the time it takes to say Bilbo Baggins, the missing ring is once again on my finger. Not instantly. It didn't just materialize. Rather, I felt it magically slide on. That reality is seriously undermined by the fact that it couldn't have. So when I look down at my hand and actually see it there, I just about fall on the floor. Where has it been this whole time? In an adjacent dimension? But then, suddenly and blessedly, clarity arrives, and I understand. All this time, the ring has been right where I put it. The handle of the fridge, like the one on the freezer, is not rectangular, but rather curved, like a human ear. Wide at the top, narrow at the bottom. You'd be more likely to grab it at the top, where there's room for, say, your whole hand, rather than further down at the ear's lobe, where there's barely room for, say, your ring finger. The day I lost the ring, I shut the door without thinking, slid my fingers down the handle as I turned toward the sink. The ring had wedged itself between the handle's curved bottom and remained there, patiently awaiting the return of my finger. I had felt the ring both leave and return as a vague sensation that was difficult to ignore, but impossible to trust. Because come on, what were the odds? How many times, month after month, had my wife and I been in and out of that refrigerator? How many times had we slammed the door? How could it have remained there all that time? Answer: somehow. It had somehow remained there where I unwittingly put it, not just wedged in, but invisible, because you would have had to bend over at the waist to see it. And even then you would be unlikely to, because the stainless steel handle of the door on the fridge was the same as the color of the ring. So, how much of this story do you believe? None? Some? All? How much should you believe? After all, I am a professional liar. To me, though, whether or not you believe the story is immaterial. My point is that stories, by their very nature, are incubators of meaning. We tell them to entertain, but also to make sense of things, or to try to. Science would have us believe that very little of this world, or our experience of it, is intrinsically true. No matter how much no matter how much we might want it to, the world, science argues, doesn't mean anything. It simply is. And what we want to believe may well be an illusion, because in the end, we have the same purpose as all other life forms: to successfully transmit our genes so that the species survives. Our desire to believe otherwise, to attach meaning to experience, is probably linked to our desire for agency. Granted, not everyone is comforted by the idea of agency. Some would be consoled by the lack thereof. Because if free will is an illusion, we're kind of off the hook, blame-wise. Like the world we inhabit, we simply are. No need to fret over complicity. To a storyteller, though, agency is as necessary as the air we breathe, and as natural. I'd no sooner lost my wedding ring than I began to attach meaning to the loss. It was gone because I was, and always had been, a careless, easily distractible man. Ironically, the ring's return altered that narrative, but its replacement was just as heavily freighted with personal significance. My marriage, as it turned out, was strong enough to withstand the carelessness that I had feared might doom it. Or maybe the ring's return meant something else entirely. Maybe my wife and I were being given permission, or even encouragement, to leave Camden, to begin the next phase of our lives together. Here was a meaning I could embrace. Except, it's apparently not the last word on the subject, because a decade into the next and possibly final phase of our lives together, I am once again fretting as I walk along the Eastern Promenade, and not about something new, but rather the same old thing. Despite accepting, at least in the rational part of my brain, that the ring in my pocket has no intrinsic meaning, I can't help feeling that it does. Rightly or wrongly, I often sense that the world is seeking my attention, as if there's something about my experience that it's afraid I'll miss. Which would explain why, over time, I have developed such a powerful conviction that even if the scientists are right, and our lived experience has no intrinsic meaning, we are morally obligated to behave as if the opposite were true, as if divining its meaning were our primary mission. What's become clear during the writing of this essay, and probably should have been clear from the outset, is that what I have been fretting over all this time was never about the ring. It's also clear that the meaning storytellers and other artists delight in searching for is infinitely flexible, tacking and veering with abandon as circumstances on the ground change. Is this a bug or a feature? I'm inclined to believe it's the latter. We tell ourselves it's answers that we're after, but maybe it's the questions we love. Thank you. is true, by the way. Every word. Not that you should believe it, but for the record. Okay. Let's see. What's on your minds? What would you like to talk about? We have a microphone in the back, and if you have a question,
please politely raise your hand.
Great. Yes. Raise a hand. The first one's always after the first one. It's a flood.
Well, Richard, while they're thinking of a question, I just want you to know how much I appreciated that selection, because I grew up on Lovejoy Hill. I walked the promenade for years, and I lived on and grew up on Waterville Street, at the foot of. I know where your house is.
Exactly.
And I grew up on Waterville Street, and one set of grandparents were up Waterville Street and to the right, and the other set of grandparents were down the street and to the right. And you make an assessment of the way people felt about Lovejoy Hill or have in the past. Never in my growing up was there an experience of concern or caution or safety.
Yeah.
We played in the streets all hours, and we were within shouting distance of our parents or of our parent neighbors who didn't let us get away.
Who served pretty much the same purpose, right?
So thank you for that part of that essay, and I'm delighted that you read it.
And isn't it strange now that I have a couple of friends who live in Portland. One who's just a few years younger than I am, but he lived in the West End of Portland, and was warned by his parents not to cross Franklin Street because supposedly Lovejoy Hill, which was largely much more of an immigrant population than the rest of Portland, that it was dangerous. It was dangerous to be up there. And in the space of our lifetimes, Lovejoy Hill has gone from being seen as someplace dangerous to someplace unaffordable. Because the lower end of Waterville Street now is pretty pricey.
Right.
Yeah.
And the house I grew up in, when most recently was on the market, $900,000.
Yeah.
All right, where are these creative inquiry questioners? Well, this lady I saw first.
Hi. Thank you for coming. It's an honor to have you speak to us for the anniversary at the library. In preparation of coming to your talk, I read Empire Falls, and initially I had a little trouble warming up to the characters, and then I remembered, hey, it's an HBO show, and I turned to it and I just watched the first hour. But the father, who was kind of annoying, wasn't so annoying when he was Paul Newman, with a little twinkle in his eye. And the woman who was the matriarch of the town, as Jane Woodward, was cool and whatever else. So I went back to the book, and I enjoyed the whole rest of it. And I know you helped write the screenplay, or maybe you wrote entirely the screenplay. Were you happy with the way it turned out, and do you have any interesting stories from that filming?
It was interesting. I didn't want to write the screenplay because after Empire Falls came out, I toured with the book for a long time, and of course it won the prize, and then I had a very lengthy paperback tour with it, and it just seemed to me that I couldn't remember my life before Empire Falls, because this was years and years and years and years. And I also felt that another writer might come in and choose to do, because what you do on screen is not necessarily the same thing as what you do in a novel. And I know that because I've written screenplays based on other writers' work, and I have seen it slightly differently, and seen when there are repetitions in it, the things that can be left out of the movie, even though they might have been important in the book. And I thought that's what Empire Falls, the miniseries, was probably going to need. Was not going to need Richard Russo, but anybody but Richard Russo to write that screenplay. And I told Paul Newman that, and he said, "No, it's you." And he said, if it isn't you, I don't think we can do it. I don't think it's so. given the choice of nothing happening or happening with me, except for me, I went ahead and did it. But I did have the feeling watching the miniseries of Empire Falls. I had the feeling that I was right, that somebody else probably should have done that. Because what I did was I solved all the film problems, all the problems for the drama that was going to be on the screen. I solved them all in exactly the same way I solved them in writing the novel, and that suggested to me that fresh eyes might have done a better job. But that said, my God, the performances were incredible. At some point, I mean, I did several projects with Paul Newman, but at some point we were talking about it, and also with Fred Skepsey, the director, and other people since have said, if that was going to be done now, that was an HBO production. If that were going to be done now, it simply would not have been made. Nobody would have spent that kind of money doing that kind of project. So we kind of saw the last of something there with that HBO production. And I mean, you can contrast it with what happened with another of my novels. Straight Man was recently made into a miniseries for AMC, and I mean, I knew that they would be making changes in the story. My God, the novel was. I mean, when the novel Straight Man came out, since the time when Straight Man came out as a novel, the word straight man had an entirely different meaning. You couldn't call it that. You couldn't call it that anymore. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. So I knew that there were going to be changes, and I knew that there were going to be many changes. But where HBO sent, I mean, there were other places they were thinking about shooting Empire Falls. One of which was Canada, because it's so. And there's no shortage of mill towns in Canada. It would have been so much cheaper to just take the film out of the country and shoot it up there. But Paul Newman insisted that there was also a couple of places that they could have shot closer to where Paul Newman lived. That he and Joanne were thinking about, that would have made their lives easier than coming up to Maine. But they sent. They sent a crew, after looking at a bunch of places. They sent a crew up to Waterville and Skowhegan and Winslow and all. I mean, all those places that I was writing about in the novel. And the crew went up there and took a look around and said, "Oh, this is perfect." Well, yeah. And they spent the money. Whereas when they filmed Lucky Hank, the first thing that they did was go to Vancouver, right? And I thought, even more interestingly, because that novel, for any of you who might have read it, takes place in a grimy central Pennsylvania railroad town. And what it's really about is the way the faculty in all the academics in that novel, unlike most of the other people in Railton, Pennsylvania, my fictional place, all those professors got to live up above the grime and up above the grease and what poor people had to live with down in Railton. All the people who worked on the trains and all of that, they had to breathe tainted air, and everything about their lives. That novel begins with one of those workers putting his head down on the railroad tracks, and it's on the day he gets what for him is kind of a tenure. He gets to retire, and he puts his head down on the railroad tracks when a train is coming by, and they find his head 2 towns away, right? So that book, like my other books, was all about class and who gets privilege and who doesn't. But not only did they run away, not only did they take it out of the country and go to Vancouver where they could shoot it so much sooner, but they didn't even send an exterior. They didn't even send a crew, because they could have sent somebody. They could have sent a crew to Altoona, Pennsylvania, and at least shot some of the exteriors. But they didn't even do that because they didn't really believe. Their thought was that this was going to be a comedy, and it's going to take place in a bunch of classrooms, and a classroom is a classroom is a classroom is a classroom. But remember, not all comedies are made that way. Remember, I'm thinking of even, and they said some of the same writers. Remember the great years of The Office? Some of the same writers who won all those Emmys working on The Office were the same writers who wrote Lucky Hank, and they were really good writers. But they were working in a different time, in a different circumstances, and the only way they were going to make that was to change all of the class stuff, replace it with kind of identity figures, and they were going to shoot it where they were going to shoot it, and that was just going to be that. Otherwise, it wasn't going to get made. So unlike Empire Falls, they would not spend the money necessary to do it. And I can't really blame them for it. I mean, it was either that or don't do it. And so they did it in the way that they could do it, which I don't think pleased anybody, really, when you come right down to it, including AMC, who thought they were shooting a comedy, and it turned out they were shooting a drama, but that came later.
Here we are.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. You described how your life was changing in Camden, but then when you moved to Portland, that's a dramatic change. That's
Yeah.
a seismic shift. Did that affect your writing and your storytelling, and if so, how?
Yeah, the question is, what happens to a writer when you change a location? I moved from Camden, Maine, which is one kind of place, in a big rambling house, and then and now I find myself living in Portland, which is a city, and the question is, what happens to a writer when you change location like that? What happens to your writing habits? For instance, what happens to the way you go about your daily life? And things do change. But honestly, I've always been able to write pretty much everywhere I've been. And being a writer in Portland, Maine, does pose some additional challenges as opposed to, say, Camden. But my God, I wrote my early novels. All of my early novels I wrote kind of in the local Denny's restaurant in places like Carbondale, Illinois, when I was teaching full time. Grading probably 100 compositions a weekend, 100 freshman composition papers a weekend. So I've always been fortunate that way. I think to whatever my physical circumstance might be. The main thing for me is if the routine changes, it still needs to be a routine. You need to do the same thing, the same place every day with the same materials, etc., etc. When we first moved to Maine after Carbondale, Illinois, we moved with my whole family. For my last really academic full-time posting was at Colby College. And as I say, for years, when I was living in Carbondale, I used to write in the Denny's there. I'd go in late morning after the breakfast crew had left, before the lunch people came in, and I would occupy a table where the waitresses wouldn't have to worry about me taking up a table that was going to be taking up their tips. And I would work in there. I would work in there for 2 hours every morning at that Denny's, and did it for a number of years. When we moved to Maine, you're not going to believe this. I'm telling you all sorts of things today, and then telling you you're not going to believe this. But when we left to move to Maine, do you have any idea how many Denny's restaurants there are between Carbondale, Illinois, and the Midwest, and Waterville, Maine, where we first moved? I had an idea for a story every time we passed a Denny's, all the way across country, and it's the routine, putting yourself in the same place with the same materials, the same pens, the same notebooks, the same kinds of paper. Just getting yourself in the habit of doing something every day with the same materials, and something happens. That's a question.
I was
Hi.
struck by the influence of your parents in the writing of your most recent book. Can you talk a little bit about the influence of your mom and
I'd
your
love to.
dad?
Yeah. I'd love to. The question is about the influence of my parents. There are a lot of essays in this book, in one way or another, that treat the general subject of how I became a writer. My mother and father could not have been more different. My father returned to Gloversville, New York, where we were living, a bona fide war hero, all the way from Normandy to Berlin with a short little excursion into the Hürtgen Forest, for those of you who are up on your World War II history. Came back a bona fide war hero. He'd lived on the world stage, and he wanted nothing more than to return to a life where he was not on the world stage anymore. He believed, and continued to believe till his dying day, that despite what everybody was saying, including my mother, was saying after the end of the Second World War, there was a general sense out there among a lot of people that war had changed America. And one of the things that I don't think my father ever acknowledged in particular, but I'm sure it was part of his thinking, because he was very attuned to the color of a person's skin. One of his best friends was black, but he was not a fan of black people. He just made as many exceptions as were necessary. But he did not believe that America had changed as a result of the Second World War, despite the fact that, as many people pointed out, it was probably the Second World War that made Italians white in America, if you think about it. Especially the southern, darker-skinned Italians, of which my father was one. Boy, I'll tell you, when he worked road construction at the end of the summer, you put him in a lineup full of black people. I'm not sure everybody would have recognized Jimmy Russo as the white guy. My father believed to the end of his days that America hadn't changed a bit. He used to love to remind me, whenever I said anything optimistic about maybe being a writer or doing something good with my life, or having a better life than he had, or the other Russos had, he would just look at me and say, "You do remember your name ends in a vowel, right?" My mother, on the other hand, was nothing if not aspirational, and she believed to her core that everything was going to change at the end of the Second World War, that the country clubs were all going to open up to people like my father and to her. She believed that education was the key, and she never made any bones of the fact that whether I wanted to or not, I was going to college. She didn't want me to become a writer. She wanted me to become a professor, and we split. From Gloversville, we went to Arizona, where I went to the University of Arizona. She set up shop in Phoenix for a while, anyway, before having to return to Gloversville. But she believed that that the thing that I was going to have to do more than anything else by leaving Gloversville was to learn a new language. And she wasn't wrong. She said, you can't go around in the world talking like Gloversville. People, number one, will laugh at you. They'll make fun of you. So we're going to go. You're going to get an education. You're going to learn to speak this new educated language. For her, as I've said, some of you've read this book. It's a line I use frequently, but it's funny, but it's also true. For my mother, my becoming educated was like entering the witness protection program, right? By doing that, I would never have to. I would not, if I could. I would just be able to deny where I was from, and no one would know any better. But to go back to the original question, to what I owe to both of my parents, and I think, strangely enough, I owe an equal amount to both of them. My mother was right. I did learn a different language there, and by going and becoming educated at the University of Arizona, I mean, I became not only an educated person there. I got several degrees in American literature, and then finally one in creative writing. But I not only got all the education she wanted me to get and more, as it turned out. So everything that she told me about America was true. Also, to apply for all of those, back then there were these wonderful government-backed low-interest student loans that I applied for. Every single one of those that I was eligible for. Applied for scholarships. Was lucky enough to get some of those. So all those things that she was telling me that education was going to do for me, in fact, did. And my life was better than that, of course, than hers was, because I was the one that got educated, despite the fact that she was the one who was making all of the sacrifices for me to do that. So all of that proved to be true. What surprised and was difficult for my mother, especially later in life, was that during all of those years that we were in Arizona, all those years that I mean, I was there for 10 years working on various degrees. But every summer I would come back and work road construction with my old man and his friends. He would pay my union dues so that I could work when I came back. And it was as a result of doing that hard work and learning about my old man and his friends that I was given the America that my mother believed in. I was actually given as a result of going back to Gloversville during all those years and working road construction with my father. I mean, it gave me those places. It gave me Mohawk. It gave me Thomaston. It gave me North Bath in the Fool novels. And I mean, by going back there, I learned who and what I loved. Which I think is just another way of saying who you are, right? And that's why my apprenticeship as a writer was longer than it probably should have been, because that was the last part of the puzzle, was to figure out who I was, because I wanted to be James M. Cain. I wanted to be Raymond Chandler, right? I wanted to be Ross McDonald. I wanted to write about crime. I wanted to write about California. I wanted to write about dames. And I knew nothing about any of those about any of those things. I'll expand this with just one more anecdote, and then we'll move on to another question. But my mentor, when I was in my final year of my MFA at the University of Arizona, was a wonderful, wonderful teacher by the name of Bob Downs, and I gave him my the book that I had written in the final year of my MFA. It was, you won't be surprised to learn, a fairly big book. And God love him, he read it. He read it right straight through from beginning to end. And he said, you know, the bad news is that this book is inert. Which I thought, yeah, that is kind of bad news. But there was other worse news that was coming. I mean, it was good news, but it was like so much good news, it was disguised as bad news at the time. So you don't recognize it. What he said to me was, you know, the whole thing, it's just you're a tourist. You don't know this world. You're pretending to know things you don't know. And it becomes obvious to anybody who's reading it that you don't know these things that you're pretending to know, just because you're interested in them. But he said, you know what? The only thing I can say is there was a chunk of this book. It was like 30 or 40 pages that was set in this New York, upstate New York, Milltown. And he said, God, you really know those people. I could have killed him. Because of course that was the good news. He was right. I knew those people like I was never going to know the touristy world that I wanted to inhabit. And armed with that, Mohawk, my first novel, came out of that conversation with that man who had the courage, the decency to tell me the truth. If it didn't work, it didn't work. But that's what a good teacher does.
I read your books over and over and over.
Oh, thank you.
You're my favorite author. I'd like to just say something. Your wife is like a saint.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. She deserves a round of applause. So maybe you've already answered this question in a sense, but let's just take Nobody's Fool.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know all these people? Did you know them all? The characters? It's an amalgamation, certainly, but how many of those characters, or taking any of these Rust Belt stories that you told, did you know these people? I mean, individually.
Well, Sully's based on my father. I've never made any secret of that, and perhaps even more so the book before that, Sam Hall and the Risk Pool, very much based on my father. The other people, I'm trying to think to what extent I knew them, and to what extent they had some sort of origin just in my imagination. I remember my father had, because my father did all those god awful jobs that Sully and Sam Hall did in the Fool books, wading, up to their knees in human excrement, the jobs that nobody wants to do. My father and a friend of his that he would get to help him out, swamp out these horrible situations. I'm sure that the guy that he used to work with all the time, I'm sure that Rub Squeers had as Rub grew in the course of these novels, he became less and less like the real life character that he was based on. But that was also true of Sully. Sully was based on my father, but the more I wrote about him, the less I was able to say that he was my old man, and that was true of everybody who knew that crew. When the movie of Nobody's Fool came out, my mother was so surprised to learn how good-looking Sully really was. It had her thinking for a minute that she'd made a mistake, but then she became rational again and realized that she hadn't. But that's the thing about characters. The thing about characters, wouldn't you agree that the thing about characters is the longer you spend with them, the more the more they take on, the more they become themselves, and the less they become you and your friends and all of that. Yeah, yeah. So with all of those characters, you know, so it's interesting too that once you've written these characters and the book is published, once the book is published and these people go out into the world without you beside them anymore, they become their own people. There's nothing you can do for them anymore after that. You'd like to shepherd them around in the world and make sure that people understand them as well as you, and love them as much as you do. But in fact, you can't. They're on their own at that point. A little bit like watching your children grow up and then find adult lives of their own. And that's the way it is with these characters. But even more kind of depressing than that, in a way, is the fact that once the book becomes published, if you're like me, you just start a new book, which means that now you're working with another bunch of characters who really do need your help and complete attention, and that means that the old ones, they really are on your own. You're not thinking about them anymore. And people have asked me, you know, how much do you think about characters? How often do you think about characters in your early novels? And the answer is never. Unless I've been asked to do a screenplay or something like that and go back and revisit them. Once they're on their own, I have no trouble forgetting about them for decades at a time.
So you get the final question, and then you can hang on to the microphone.
The first question, which is sort of the easy question, is when you're writing a novel, do you live with these characters in your head? I mean, do you walk around your house talking to them and plotting stories with them, asking questions, answering them? I mean, are they real as you're writing?
Too real, and this. Now we go back to talking about my wife as a saint again. But Barbara knows, after all of these years, that there are times I'll have a certain expression on my face when we're talking to each other. That I'll have a certain expression on my face that tells her that I'm pretending, but really I'm really thinking about Sully, or I'm really thinking about whatever the character and the characters in whatever book I'm working on. The sad truth is, I'm like a lot of writers, I'm never not working, which means that you know, I've been spending a lot of time, as some of you may know. I have two daughters. Neither apple fell terribly far from the tree. My daughter Emily is a bookstore owner in Portland, Maine. My other daughter Kate tried her best not to be a writer. She went to the Slade Art School, became an artist, and she is still an artist. But she finally gave up one day and said, "Okay, fine, I'll be a writer." I have been on the road with her. Her second novel just came out, oh God, I lost the thought. How real the characters are, and I know that to an extent, I think not only has Emily and Kate, not only has Barbara experienced that with me, that time, those times when I'll have that expression on my face, which is trying to pretend attendance, but is really trying to resolve something with one of my characters. I mean, Kate and Emily suffered the same fate. You know, there were times when it was the same way with them when they were trying to get Dad's attention, and I'd like to think that most come from a left behind place. Gloversville, New York was kind of a canary in the coal mine, in the sense that what happened there happened probably a generation earlier than it was going to happen other places, by which I mean that whether it was the paper mill or the leather mill or whatever the kinds of difficult manual labor that people do and have done, forever in America. That those kinds of jobs, for various reasons, were going to go overseas, and those places that were left behind were not only left behind, they were forgotten. And I think that the most difficult part of that, and I know a lot of these places, and I know a lot of these people. And I think that the most difficult thing for them was not the fact that they lost their jobs, which was terrible, but they lost their sense of their sense of place in America, their sense of where they belong in the social fabric. So taking somebody's job away is bad enough, but then by pretending that it really doesn't matter somehow that all these jobs went to the Philippines, or they went wherever these jobs went for cheap labor, or for labor that couldn't be done in America anymore because of OSHA, because you couldn't continue to pump poison into the water anymore, and those jobs went to places that would allow you to pump poison into the water. I think all of those left behind places, they all have an awful lot in common with the left behind place that I write about in Gloversville, New York. And what I find fascinating about this right now, at this particular political moment, is that a lot of the left behind places in America are in very, very red districts, very, 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 very red environments, which means that, in a sense, that's who I'm writing about. I'm writing about left behind places, and a lot of the people in those left behind places, I think, are rightly furious that so little attention is being paid to the kind of lives that they once had before those jobs went away. I mean, we're going at least as far back as James McMurtry's wonderful song from the George W. Bush administration, which goes, "We can't make it here anymore." It has a wonderful double meaning in the song, is that we in America, we can't make it here anymore because we don't make it here anymore. There's nothing, we can't make it. We can't, whatever it is we want to make, we can't make it here anymore. Those jobs have gone away. And because those jobs have gone away, we can't make it here anymore. So, anyway, you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much.
Joining us tonight. This has been just engaging and exciting for us to have Richard Russo here, and really delighted to have you celebrate the 130th anniversary.
That's something, isn't it?
It is something. It is 130 years of this local library, and it is, as many of you know, it's a great resource for the town. So I hope you all come out and come to some of the other anniversary celebrations and support your wonderful local library. Thank you. Thanks for doing that.